Welcome. We are going to be talking about if statements today. You can see I have a highlighter on my cursor, so hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for you to see where I am, what I'm doing. Also, some of the videos before this might have been a bit laggy. Hopefully things look a little better now. So let's dive into what you need to know in order to understand if statements. There are specific operators here that have a specific order of operations. First, Python will look at the exponents and it will evaluate whatever's on the left and right of the exponent first. It will simplify that into a value, and then it will look at the rest of these down here with multiplication. It will then look at that. Mathematically, this is how order of operations works. You see also there's modulus here, and you'll see this double slash, and I will explain that in a minute. Addition is just going to be after that, obviously. Mathematically, it's the same. So exponents, multiplication, addition, as you would expect. Then we have all these comparison operators to compare, are these two things equal? Are they not equal? Is it less than or equal? Is it greater than or equal? Is it greater than or less than? Then we have not, then we have and, then we have or. From here all the way down, we're going to be covering these so that you can start using these in your conditionals. And conditionals are required for if statements, so you can decide if you should run a block of code or not. Just keep in mind, this is the order to which things are processed in Python. Other programming languages do this same order. So this is a great thing to remember, and you will naturally just understand this as you start creating more software. So let's open up the code editor and we will try to use some relational operators. And then once you understand how the operators operate, then we can start using them in if statements. All right, so let's print out a comparison between two different values, and we're just going to see if we can get it to show true or false. Everything in the computer is 1 or 0, true or false. This is how computers work, and everything stored in the computer and all the processes run on the computer work with ones and zeros. Strings get stored as ones and zeros, floats get stored as ones and zeros, booleans obviously get stored as 1 or 0, but we denote them in our code as true or false. So this print statement, we can print out a conditional, and the conditional is just going to have these right here. So let's try to use the comparison operator, which is just two equal signs, and two equal signs is not the same as one. The assignment operator is not the same thing as the comparison operator. So let's get two values like 8, and let's compare it with 9 using the comparison operator. And what this essentially is in English is show me if 8 is equal to 9, and the result should be true or false. Obviously this is false, but let's just run it to get some practice. And we ran it and it's false. So it printed out a value that's Boolean. So this resulted in a Boolean value. After the code runs this, it evaluates this to true or false because we have a comparison operator here. Here, any relational operator we use here will result in true or false. So I can check to see if 8 is less than 9. We can also check to see if 2 is equal to 2. That's true. We can check to see if 2 is not equal to 2. And you'll see false here because it is false that 2 is not equal to 2. 2 is equal to 2. Therefore, this statement here is false. Besides using numbers, we can also use strings. I can check to see if hello is equal to hi, and that's false because it checks to see if each of the characters are both in order and they are the same characters in each position within the string. So I would have to say hello exactly the same for these strings to be compared and be true in this comparison. Two equal signs is the comparison operator. It's comparing. One equal sign is an assignment operator. It's going to assign a value to a variable that is on the left. This is not a variable. This is an actual string value that should be stored inside a variable, but it is not a variable. So Python will not run this code. It doesn't make sense to try to store a string inside of a string. Plus printing it out doesn't make any sense. You only want to use the assignment operator when you're making a new variable and setting it equal to something. Just remember that assignment is not the same thing as comparison. Also, when you're using conditionals, it evaluates variables into their values. So when it looks at this variable, it will say, okay, I'm going to put 3,948 here where the new variable is, and it will evaluate to that number. And then it's going to compare this number with this string, and obviously the number is not going to be the same as the string, so this would result in false. And if we compared it to another number, it would be false because the numbers are not the same, obviously. We can also put another variable here, try to compare them, and it's false because this string is not equal to this number. If we want it to evaluate as true if they're not equal, then we can just put not equal, compare them, and it's true. Let's turn this into another number, turn this into 88, and let's do some other comparisons like greater than, run that, true. This is much greater than this, so that's true. Less than, obviously it's false. And hopefully you get the idea by now. Less than or equal to, same thing. Greater than or equal to, same thing. And just so you know, you cannot do equal to or less than. That does not exist. You have to do less than or equal to. So just remember that. Okay, so knowing that, I think we can move on to if statements. So just using English, we can say if true, colon, print, hi. Run that. And we said hi here because the word if, whatever's to the right of it, if it's true, if it evaluates to true, or if it is true, we run everything that's indented after the colon here. So we could make a block of code that said hi 2, hi 3, hi 4, and so on. We can run that, and it prints everything that's indented if this is true. Well, let's make another line of code that's not indented. It says hi 7, and we'll see every time, no matter what, this is going to run, but it only enters the indented part if it's true. So let's run this. You'll see everything and 7 also was run. If we add false, then it will automatically gray out this code because it's telling you this will never get run. And only hi 7 shows up because it's not indented in the if statement, and it will just skip everything inside this if statement and print hi 7. Now you might have figured out by now, just putting false is not very useful, but if we had variables that we input up here and then they ended up being like, let's say the values of 5 being compared with 4, then we run this code and it's hi 7 because it's comparing 5 and 4 and they are not equal, so this is a false statement. It evaluates to the actual value false, therefore it's not going to run this code. So let's try something a bit fancier. Let's assign my input to an input of prompting the user by saying enter a number, please. And what happens when we compare my input with the number 5? And I made a mistake here on purpose. It's because if we enter 5, it's only going to say hi 7, but these were equal. This should have evaluated as true and printed out all these, but they were not actually equal because this is a string type and we want to compare it as a number. So a floating point and numbers are stored as float types, so we have to go float and cast all of this to be the value of a float, and this is now a number when we input it. And let's run this. Enter a number, please. Let's enter 5. And everything ran because 5 is equal to 5, so all this code was run. And of course, we expect this to run every time, no matter what. And hopefully this makes sense. If not, hopefully this diagram makes sense as your program procedurally goes line by line from top to bottom. If you get to the if statement, it's going to check the condition. The conditional we put here will be either true or false. And so this code block here is the indented code, and it runs through all of this code if the result is true. If the result is false, it skips the code block and then continues to the next line that's not indented underneath the if statement. So regardless, whatever's under the if statement and not indented, it will reach that code eventually, but this is conditional code, and we denote the block by indenting the code. And so all this is the code block. So if we want another block of code to run otherwise, if it's not 5, and only if it's not 5, but we also want to keep the if statement here, we can run an else, and then under the else, we can print not the same, or anything else you want to put here. And it's another block, so you can have as many lines as you want in this block, and as long as it's indented, this will all get run if it's not equal. So it will skip all this code and run everything here if it's not equal. And regardless of which of these blocks are run, at the end, this print statement will always be run. You can add spaces and it will not make any difference. What is important is that it is indented, and that makes the separation. If you try to add code here, this else then complains you cannot do that. Everything has to be one right after the other between if and else. And let's run this. Enter a number 5. Oops. Enter a number 5. And we get what we had last time. Let's run it again and enter 7. And it looks like it's not the same. We also got this high 7 here at the bottom. Depending on what we input, we get a specific result. This diagram also shows you an if-else, and the process is pretty much the same, except if you get false, you run this other block exclusively if you get false, and if you get true, you run this block, and then at the very end, you continue running the rest of the lines of code underneath. At the end of each block, it's going to continue afterwards. So go ahead and pause the video and study this if it might seem a little bit confusing. Also feel free to try coding your own examples. This is just an example to show you that it can be a block of code, and you can have as much as you want inside each of these. And if you've been following along and you wrote all this code, that is phenomenal. You just wrote code that took input, did logic, and then you got an output depending on what the input was. That's a big step. From here, once you understand this, you can start applying conditionals in your code to do really useful things. This may not seem very useful by itself because it's just one part of the building blocks that you need to really start programming other useful systems. Video games use if statements a lot, so this is definitely logic you'll have to know if you want to make a game or to do any business logic. You can also do else if, ELIF. And let's see if my input is equal to 10, colon, and print here is yet another condition. And if neither of these conditions are true, if it's not 5 and it's not 10, it will then print the else. It will then run whatever's in the else. So let's run this. 5. Only this one was satisfied, so it printed out high, then skipped everything else and went to the next line of code. And let's run it again. And let's enter 10. The second condition was satisfied, and the other two were skipped because only this condition was satisfied. So we got here's yet another condition and high 7, and we only got those 2 lines that ran because this one was false, and else only applies if both of these are not satisfied. So let's run it again and enter anything else like 457, and both of these obviously are not satisfied, so it's going to run this line, so not the same. Hopefully this makes sense. You'll see if you look at this diagram, it would obviously have an else if in between these two, and if the condition was false, it would go to the else if. If that was false again, it would go to the else, and only the else would be run if both of those conditions were not satisfied. I highly recommend you look at w3schools.com and read through this page on if else. Feel free to read anything else you want on the language, including strings, booleans, operators is a good one too. You can see all the examples here, and you'll see floor division. Let's say you divide something and the equivalent value would be 2.5. It would just floor it, meaning it would just show you the value of 2. Or if it's 2.75, it'll show you the value of 2. If it's 3.8, it'll show you the value of 3. If it's 3.2, it'll still show you the value of 3. It'll basically just cut off any fraction of a value and give you the whole number. So you can run it, and this is just a quick way to run some examples from W3 Schools. They provide you a way to run code. So 15 over 2 is 7.5 if you just do a regular division, 7.5. With floor division, you round to the nearest whole number, but it rounds down every time. So this could be useful in some circumstances. So just so you know that's there, that's how it works. Feel free also to go down and look at Python assignment operators. There's more than just assigning with equals. You can also add 3 to the value. So if it was 20, you're adding 3 to it. So after this, the value would be 23 if before it was 3. Let's say if it was 5, you assign it to 5 first, and then if this was the next line of code, it would be 8 after this line of code. It's the equivalent of saying let's assign x to what it was before plus 3. So x plus equals 3 is just saying add 3 more to x. Same thing with minus equals. Take 3 away from x and multiply whatever x is by 3 and then assign it to x just like this and so forth. You can go ahead and test out as many of these as you want and try things out here. So that's something you can look at. In the next video, we are going to go over while loops. So feel free also to read about while loops, and I will see you in the next video.